Hey guys, it's Mr. Webker here. I am on jury duty. As you can tell, I'm not in your classroom today. Um, so thank you so much for coming to this video as I've asked you guys to do. I know that it's like not normal to watch me on a YouTube video and be like, hey, that's my teacher. But the way I look at it is at least you get time with me. So today we're going to explain how this is going to work the next couple weeks. And then we're going to go right into notes. We're going to learn about Russia and China and their revolutions. I'm going to try and make this as short as possible. If you have questions, you can ask Miss Polito when you get back to class. Um, or you can ask me on Fridays. I'm still going to be there every Friday. I will collect your notes and your work. I'm going to explain how that works on the next slide. But thank you so much for doing this with me, and I really hope that we have a great time creating these and learning in a different way this semester. So, how this is going to work is you will do most of these notes at home. I am going to allow Miss Polito to give you some time in class to work on them. Um, but on Friday, you will turn in both the PowerPoint guide, which Miss Polito should have given you on Monday, and notes. You're still going to take Cornell notes on this. I'm going to explain how you're going to do that on the next slide. Feel free to pause this video at any time. If this is just going way too fast, let me know. Feel free, and we could go from there. In order to be successful in these next couple of weeks, really what you need is a notebook, a pen and a pencil, and a highlighter. I'm going to go over sort of how you're going to use those. But as you take notes every day, please remember to carry those with you. So basically, what's going to happen is you're going to watch these videos on YouTube. Um, if you do not have access to a phone that can do it, you can go to the library. You only have to watch this one video every week. You're going to take Cornell notes as you watch the video, just like we do in class all the time. You will use your highlighter. So I'm going to give you a PowerPoint guide, which Miss Polito should have given you on Monday. You're going to read through these notes and you're going to listen to me. And when you find answers to your PowerPoint guide in your Cornell notes, you're going to highlight those answers. You will then answer the question on your PowerPoint guide. You're going to answer that in full and complete sentences. Uh, and then I will collect both your PowerPoint guide and your work from the week every Friday. I'm going to have Miss Polito sign off on your work every day, and then I will count those points, and that's what's going to go into your grade book. It's still going to be a lot like what we've done before. I don't really want to change this at all. But what I do want to do is I want you guys to have the best education possible. So I'm still here guiding you guys, even though I'm not in class. Today, we're going to start our first notes. So yay for notes together. So go ahead, take out your Cornell notes. I want you guys to still create a Cornell note column. You're going to write your EQ there. Today we're going to learn about how nationalism changed both Russia and China in the 1900s, but specifically and mostly we're going to look at communism and how that changed both countries. So let's hop on into that. I am recording this as I look at the PowerPoint with you guys, so if I look a little weird, that's why. Um, but I hope to get this done. If you need a pause at any time and like come back the next day, feel free. Remember, this is due on Friday, so this video will be about 20 minutes long. But if you cannot sit down for all 20 minutes, do 10 minutes today, 10 minutes the next day, whatever works. As long as you have it all done by Friday, you should be good. So, mostly, um, the revolutions that happened in Russia were caused by lack of fuel, food, and freedom. That's one of your questions. I'd write that down. Um, as World War One came to an end, even though Russia did not lose. They did not exactly win, and so people took that as a loss. Um, and they did not like their leaders. We're going to go over their leaders on the next slide, but their leaders did not give them any control until they felt like they needed to rise up to. What is a revolution? So, a revolution mostly is when people try to gain control of their government by overthrowing their leaders. This happened in the United States when we think of the American Revolution and 4th of July. We overthrew England and we kicked them out, and so because of that, we get to blow up fireworks. Um, in Russia, they had a revolution to overthrow their leaders, which started in 1917. Like I said, because of shortage of food and fuel, they did not have food or gas to power their stoves. It's a cold winter in Russia, so if you do not have gas, you literally freeze to death. And so people did not have this. They were dying. They had lost the war, so they felt like they had no control over really anything, and their rulers really did not listen to them. So when they asked for basic needs, basically their king, which we'll go over later, it's like, hey, yeah, forget you, I'm gonna do what I want. People did not like their leader, and so because of that, they began to overthrow their government. Their leader, as you can tell by the funny picture above, is called a czar. C-Z-A-R. It's pronounced czar. Like Little Caesar, but not czar. The word actually comes from Caesar, but which means like a leader in Rome. And so the czar had been ran by the same family for hundreds of years. And this is actually a czar above us. So when I say the word czar, I'm referring to the king of Russia. So we're not going to say the word king. I'm going to try not to say the word king. We're going to refer to him as the czar. So um, the czars in Russia were hard leaders. They did not give to the people at all. Um, the last two created this type of government called an autocracy, which means literally the king does everything. It's sort of like a monarchy, only a little harsher. If you do not do what the king says, you die. We will see in the revolution that when people protested, the czars had no problem killing them. Um, the second to last czar was named Alexander III. Basically, he was a devout Russian. He loved Russia. He wanted to make Russia great again. No pun intended. Um, but he forced people to only speak the Russian language. Russia's huge. There are a ton of different types of people in Russia. But the Tsar said, no, you will only speak Russian. I don't care what religion you are. I don't care what um, type of person in Russia you are. You will speak Russian and you will go to the religion which he liked, which was a form of Christianity called Russian Orthodox. Um, and so he basically either kicked out or killed people who were not like him. Both Jews and Polish people did not do so well in Russia at the time. His son, Nicholas II, would be the last Tsar. And basically, he does the exact same thing, and he does not see the protests coming. He's sort of blind to the fact that like people don't like him. He's like that cocky guy that thinks everyone likes him, but everybody hates him. That's Nicholas II, and he will soon enough give up his control over Russia, um, because he does not listen to what people tell him to do. Russia basically industrialized late. Remember, we talked about the Industrial Revolution last semester. Russia industrialized late, and one of the reasons why they industrialized late is because the king would, or the czar would tax you if you created a factory, and he taxed you so much that it wasn't even worth starting factories. And so even though Russian factories doubled, many people felt like they could not actually run a factory in a way that made them money. And so also the leaders of the factories were not great managers. They had a lot of issues with low working conditions. People were not paid enough to survive. They used horrible child labor. Kids would die. And so because of that, people began to form these things called unions. What a union is basically it's a group of people that work together on the same type of stuff. And so they form a union to fight for their wages, to fight to have better wages, better pay, better working conditions. I'm in a union. I'm in the teachers union. And so uh, in order to demand better pay and better conditions, Russians formed unions, which would later spread this idea called socialism and communism throughout Russia. People were not happy with this society. because unions spread this idea of socialism throughout uh, Russia. I want to discuss what socialism is. Again, we've talked about this before, but basically, socialism is when a government owns everything and they divide it evenly throughout the people. So, for example, in the United States, we have giant companies like Apple, Microsoft, um, UPS, FedEx. These are giant companies. Now imagine if the money they made was divided evenly to everybody in the society, no matter if they work for FedEx or not. That's basically what socialism is. So food is divided evenly between everybody. Um, Money is divided evenly between everybody. So whether you are a farmer or a janitor or a CEO, you make the same amount of money, you live the same amount of lifestyle. This is an idea of perfect equality, which doesn't always happen in the world, but the idea is that we can do so in socialism. So Karl Marx leads this revolution in Russia. He is sort of the father of socialism, but what he says is like, hey, we can't just have equality. The way that we get equality is the poor people, which he called the proletariat. They're the workers, the farmers, the people that do not have money or wealth. They should rise up and demand equal pay, which leads to this like weird idea of a crazy revolution, which we will see. People begin to believe him and agree with him in Russia, and they create this group called the Bolsheviks, which are led by a man named Vladimir Lenin. Lenin will later control um, the government in Russia. Um, but in 1905, we see the first protest for socialism or communism in Russia. So workers and on a Sunday in 1905, they were off work and they went to the palace and began to protest and burn down um, part of the palace. The Tsar, in response, um, basically fires shots from his army at the protesters and kills many of them. This leads them to be even more unhappy. And so he realizes that, hey, this killing people isn't working, so I need to find a way to make it better. And so what he does is he says, hey, I'm going to create this thing called a parliament, which is sort of like what England and the United States has, and you'll be able to vote on laws, but I still have final say. So even though he made it sound like he was giving people a say in their government, he did not actually give them a say in their government. He made this like fake little parliament, which really never did anything, and so people felt like they still weren't heard. Um, which leads us to March 1917. Just a few years later, people are still unhappy with uh, the protests, and they feel like they haven't been heard. And so women in the city lead something called a strike, which means you don't work. And if they don't work, you have to close down factories, which means the king doesn't get his taxes. And so this really angers the king. Um, but he realizes soon that there's nothing he can do to stop these riots. People don't have food, they don't have fuel, they don't have gas to warm their houses. They are starving and they are cold and they know that they could die soon. And so they protest. And so the king has no choice but to step down from his office. What in politics this is called to abdicate, which is one of your words. Abdicate means to step down or to leave your office. So like if you guys thought I was the worst teacher ever, and I stink, and I smell bad, and I can't teach worth a darn, I would have to abdicate my classroom. I'd have to step down from my job as a teacher. So Tsar Nicholas had to abdicate his office and step down because he was not a good leader, and he lost control of Russia, which leads to a revolution called the Bolshevik Revolution. Where there was no king left. The Tsar had stepped down. There was no family to take over for Tsar Nicholas. And so Lenin, our boy from the Bolsheviks, says, hey, I'll take over. And he's going to create a new land led by what he called the Soviets, which is like the people. And he promised that there'd be peace. They would never go back into war. And so Lenin ends the fighting in World War I. and he lets the Allies finish the war on their own, and then he offers bread to people, and so he actually does. He is able to create an economy where they can get some food. He does help the economy, but he does so while fighting a civil war because not everybody liked Lenin. There's two sides of the war. There's a Red Army, which was led by the communists, and the White Army, which was led by a bunch of different people. They had a bunch of different ideas, which is why they really weren't able to win because they all disliked each other. And so imagine if all your friends are fighting against one guy, but none of you guys know why you don't like him, and he has a group of friends that all agree. He's probably going to win because they have the same plan, they have the same goal, and so the Red Army wins against the White Army, and it's one of the deadliest battles in actually history. Millions of people die in the Russian Civil War. So my boy Lenin, sadly, does not see his country through. So in 1921, he creates these new plans, which basically allow the economy to do a lot better in Russia. Um, and then he divides Russia into like different states, like how we have the United States, they had the United Soviet States of Russia. He realized that there was no way he could control everything. So if he allowed people to have a little bit of say in their little state, and then they answered back to him, he'd be able to control his society a little better. He renamed the party from the Bolsheviks to the Communist Party of Russia, which will later lead the communist nation as a whole. Sadly, Lenin is not able to see his success all the way through because he has a stroke in the 1920s, and so he is sort of taken over by communism as a whole. Communism is basically a different type of economy. We do not have a communist economy, but it's called a command economy, which means the government makes the rules on everything. So they decide how much food you eat, they decide where you sleep, they decide what your house looks like, which sounds really controlling, but because they can just do this, they can take property and distribute it or give it out to everybody equally. um, they create a society where everyone is equal. So even though some people say, hey, I don't want the government controlling me, they like the idea of having a government where all land, all wealth, all property is distributed equally. And so they want equality, and so they're willing to give up their freedom of choice if it means that everybody lives equally. In communism, you give up your freedom of choice so that way you can live equally with everybody else. In Russia, communism is sort of taken over at the death of Lenin by a guy named Joseph Stalin. Let me tell you a little bit about Stalin. Stalin is definitely the craziest human being you will ever meet in your life. Stalin takes communism and he says, I need to make it stronger. People are not going to just give up their stuff because we say, hey, we're going to make you equal, which makes sense. If you said, hey, Mr. Wupker, give up all your money and I promise you, you will have the same food as everybody else, I would say, well, first of all, I don't have a lot of money to give up, but second of all, no thank you, carry on. Um, so Joseph Stalin says, hey, I realize that people aren't going to just do this because they're nice. So we need to make them follow communism. And so in 1922, he takes over after the death of Lenin and creates a totalitarian Russia. That word is totalitarian, like total control, total totalitarian. Uh, Basically, there are no freedoms in this country. If you do not do what he says, you die. If you disagree with him out loud, you die. He has secret police that listen and they want to hear somebody disagree with him. And if you do, they will take you and they will kill you. There is no freedom. The radio plays exactly what he wants you to hear. The TV shows you exactly what he wants to see. The art on the streets is exactly what he wants. We're going to show you on the next slide some of the art, the propaganda from this time. He destroys his enemies. he has this thing called the Great Purge, where basically if you disagree with him, he captures you and kills you. So that way anybody who disagrees with him either stays quiet or dies. People learn really quick that you do what he says or you die. If you disagree with him, he would send you to a thing called a gulag, which is their gulag. What a gulag is basically it's a work camp. So it's cold. They send you to the cold places of Russia called Siberia, which are in the north. It's freezing cold. You work till you die. Um, and so even though he builds a great economy, Stalin builds a great economy in Russia. They're stronger than they've ever been, and people have food. And Russia survives. They lose their freedom in return. So even though you get all the food you want, you lose your freedom. It doesn't sound like a fair trade to me, but many people liked him. These are pictures that Stalin had made and put out throughout the city. He wanted workers to know that not only were they strong, as you can see on the bottom right, it's a strong worker. Not only were they strong, they had a strong leader. Stalin was a strong leader, and so he wanted to look like a leader that could be followed. As you can see on the bottom left, the whole world is following Stalin in that picture, which shows you, oh man, what a great leader I have. Um, Also, he's a smart guy, which you can see in the top right. He wanted people to see him as a genius with all those books that he probably never read. Also, furthermore, he wanted you to know that he can hold a baby like nobody else. I think he's trying out for Lion King in the top left. I'm not exactly sure. It's like he's holding Simba and saying, all the communist land you see before you could be yours, Simba. That was a joke. So you can laugh at that. I know these YouTube videos are lame, but whatever. Our last slide for the week, remember, our last slide for the week, you're so welcome, um, is China. China, um, is sort of like Russia. They're another revolution. They're sort of like Russia. In 1911, the Qing family had ran Russia forever, but they were overthrown for like a more democratic government, sort of like what the United States has. This democracy did not last long um, because World War One had struck, and they entered World War One, but were given nothing in return, and they felt like they deserved something for helping the Allies in World War One, and so they began to demonstrate against the government because the people blamed the government for killing them and not getting anything in return. Mao Zedong becomes a leader in these demonstrations, and he wants a communist China. So he leads the Communist Party in China as they try to take over the government. This leads to the Chinese Civil War. There's two sides, the communists and the nationalists. We'll go over this a little more, and I think chapter 19, which is the Cold War. And so Japan uh, attacks China during their civil war. So Japan sees the Chinese Civil War going on. They say, hey, maybe I can attack and take their land. So China literally times out their civil war. They're like, hey, time out. We're going to stop fighting each other. They joined together and beat the Japanese. And you would think they would learn, hey, look, we can live in harmony. See, we joined together. We beat somebody. That does not happen. After they beat the Japanese, the Chinese Civil War continues and the communists win, and communist China still exists today, and they're actually one of the last communist countries of the world. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. I know this is going to be a little different. I hope that this helped. I love seeing you guys. I act like I can see you. I really can. But I love being able to communicate with you guys. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or remind me. I am going to put this on YouTube. Every week I will put a new video up on YouTube with your slides. Feel free to always get a hold of me. I'm always here for you guys. Now what you're going to do is you're going to look over the Cornell notes, which you should have taken on this. You're going to highlight your answers to this. You're going to work on your question and summaries, and you're going to answer the questions on your PowerPoint guide, which you were given on Monday. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Have a great week, guys.